In an ever-changing world, Off Hollywood Media presents a voice of truth and inspiration, resonating a vibration of love and understanding, illuminating new paths for new directions, as we, as one, strive for higher and higher levels of consciousness, always remembering life changes. And now, your host, our MC, our master of change, Filippo Voltaggio.
Ciao, everyone. I am so excited to be here hosting Life Changes with you all today. Or rather, I'm hosting and you all are here listening. And I'm excited to be here and excited that you are here. We have a great guest for you today, and his name is Jason Hughes. He's a tennis pro, a writer, an author, and a life coach. And he's written an interesting book, and he has an interesting story and message that we're looking forward to presenting to you all. And speaking of interesting stories, I was exercising this morning listening to a man that I find also very interesting, and I like his work very much, and that is Gregg Braden. And Gregg Braden reminded me that that there has been some information that was either inadvertently left out or left out on purpose of our sacred scriptures in the Judeo-Christian teachings, and maybe more specifically the Bible and maybe a couple other texts. And he said that there might have been people that didn't want us to have that information, and as a way of being able to control people. And it's really interesting because it made me think of something. I thought, sometimes when people do something to, let's say, try and sabotage somebody else, if that indeed was the case, sometimes it ends up backfiring. And in this case, this is what I'm thinking. Sometimes when we're given the answers, it's just no fun. It's just not right. Sometimes we don't want the answers. Sometimes we want to figure it out on our own. And so, for example, when we were little, some of us played a game called Clue, C-L-U-E, Clue. And in the game, you would take cards and put them in an envelope and set them to the side. And then you would play the game with other children, trying to figure out who killed who, in what room, with what weapon. Great game for children, by the way. But we didn't know any different, and it was fun for us. But the thing is that the answers were there all the time, right next to us in a little paper envelope, not under lock and key, not in our parents' room, and there was no guard or nobody saying, don't look at that, except for ourselves. And we were the ones that put the answers there and didn't look at them throughout the whole game until the very end, when we might have figured out who it was that killed who, in what room, with what weapon, and then we looked at the answer to see if we were right or not. And why would we do that? Because I'm starting to figure out that's the game. That it's the process, it's the journey, it's the experience that we had of playing. And learning from each other, learning how we can laugh about things, or how we can experience who cheats and who doesn't, and how we could change the rules the next time we decide to play the game and invent things. And it was an experience. It was a process. It was a journey. It was that we were wanting. At least in our case, with my family and circle of friends, it wasn't necessarily figuring out the rule, the answers, because we could have just turned over the cards. And at least in my family or my circle of friends, whoever won, it was no big deal. So you won. It was, let's play again. And only when we got older that we started to get a little bit more competitive, that we started saying, I'm the winner of this game. Whenever we play this game, I win. So, but back to what I was saying, as children, we had the answers all along. And there were several games like that. Even if you're playing Monopoly or Life, the games, there's the start, there's the finish. Why do you want to even go across the whole board? Just cut across and finish. No fun. We want to have the experience. So I wonder if it was done on purpose or whether or not it was, and whatever purpose it was supposed to serve. If the answers, as Greg Braden was talking about, and so many people have talked about, if the answers to who we are and what we're capable of really have been written down somewhere, really are out there, and we are only now starting to figure them out, maybe this process, I'm thinking out loud here, has actually served us well in looking for them instead of just complacently standing by and saying, oh, well, we already know this, so what? No. I think we came down to have an experience. I think this is part of the experience. On this level, however, and at this juncture, knowing that the answers are there and that maybe we have figured them out on our own, I'm ready to turn over those cards, take them out of the envelope, what have you, and look at them and see if we were right and start living the game that we have experienced and we have won together. That's my feeling right now. I'm feeling like we've all come a long way, we've all had experiences, and that we have won. And now it's time to turn over the cards and reveal what we have won, get to the finish line and say, okay, we are ready for a whole different level. It's now a different time. The game has changed. Mm-hmm. And so I like that analogy, and it's interesting because it applies to so much in our lives, so much. When we were talking about with a friend this morning about my singing career and how he was saying how I chose not to play that game, and how in his career he chose not to play that particular game. But we choose our games, we choose our experiences, we choose our life. And how fitting, as I'm thinking about this, that I plan to talk about this. And today, our guest is a tennis pro and trainer who trains people on a game, and a game that he considers to be quite spiritual. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the show Jason Hughes, who is originally from Connecticut, and he was a nationally ranked tennis player who at the age of 12 was number 3 in New England and had a very promising career in tennis ahead of him. But he had a near-death experience at the age of 16 after a traumatic car accident that he'll tell us about, I'm sure. Now he is, of course, a tennis pro, a writer, an author, a life coach. He holds a master in holistic counseling and is a holistic health life coach. Jason has appeared on television shows Starting Over with life coach Aylan.
Filippo, I can help you with that. Ian Van Sam.
Thank you very much. And
yeah,
so you've heard his voice. Again, welcome, Jason Hughes.
Well, Filippo, thank you very much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Well, one of the reasons that we, talking amongst our team, that we wanted to have you on the show was because you're very much a regular guy, and I mean that in a great way, in the sense that you're not pretending to be anything. You don't pretend to have all the answers in the world, and you don't dress a certain way to say I'm a spiritual guy. I mean, you're very much a sports guy. You dress like a sportsman, and you're a normal, everyday person, but you are helping people experience extraordinary experiences in their lives.
Well, I appreciate you saying all of that, and quite honestly, if it were up to me, I would probably just wear a white T-shirt every day, so I think that's about as ordinary as it gets, but yet I do strive for not only myself, but helping other people kind of reach for the extraordinary, and the first thing that popped into my head when you were saying that was, you know, one thing I've tried to educate myself on and self-train myself in my own spiritual journey, and I want other people too, about when you were talking about being ordinary. I think being ordinary and being normal is no longer wearing any false social mask, if you will. And I very much walk the world with an open heart, and I have, you know, a heart-based consciousness, and I think that's where, you know, a lot of the answers lie for us, and you were just talking about that. And so I like to help people kind of take off that false social mask, so I don't try to be, I'm very real, I'm very humble, and I want other people to be the same way, and I'm not trying to be something that I'm not. I just, that's how I try to live my life, and to be very real, and just kind of present to the world what God has given me, if you will.
Well, excellent, and that is why you're here, and one of the reasons why we like you so much. So let's start at the beginning.
I appreciate that very much.
Well,
and
good.
I'm all for life changes and helping other people making life changes that's going to allow them to live more effectively as they see fit, you know, because that's what I've been striving to do, and I've had a lot of people help me along the way, and I learned a long time ago, having other people save my life, that we really do need each other, and we can't get through this without other people, and you know, so that's why I've seen pain as a unity issue, and that the pain that we've all been through in our lives should really be bringing us closer together, not further apart.
You know, actually, I was going to ask a question. I want to go back to your childhood, but before you do, you just struck on something that I think is really important, and I've heard so many people say the opposite of that. So many people have said to me, I think people need to come to that experience on their own, and. Okay. I've argued that, and as a matter of fact, was arguing that just the other day with a very close friend, saying if that person needed to come to that experience on their own, they would have been on their own coming to that experience. But they've come to you, they've come to us. They are looking for a mirror. They are looking for support. Their energy is attracted here to us. There is a reason. They're not supposed to be alone.
Right. Well, okay. I don't think we're ever alone, you know, quite honestly. I mean, I think, but that's part of the power that people need to learn to tap into, that really the greatest relationship you're ever going to have in this world is the one you have with yourself and whatever you choose to call your highest power or your God, or we don't even need to use those words. I don't think it's about what words we use. And, really just that highest relationship we can have with ourselves, and then everything external flourishes from that. So I think however we come to the experience of you know, whether we're alone, you know, physically, or we have other people's help, I don't think it really, to me, it doesn't really matter. You know, I think that, you know, we need each other, and everyone deserves the love, and however they get it, whether they come to us or they're listening or whatever it is, I think it's just, you know, I just believe everyone deserves it. So I'm not sure if that's exactly what you were getting at.
And no, it isn't, but it's another good point. So both points are valid, and they do meet somewhere. And let's go back to your childhood, because I find this really interesting. You were playing tennis, you had a promising career ahead of you, should you have chosen to do that. Now, you were born in a family that had some social conditions. The family was fairly well-to-do, and you were headed to a private high school is where they saw you, and private college and all that. Instead, all that came to a halt or so much of it, with a tragic car accident, right?
Right, yeah, exactly. No, I definitely came from a loving family, but, really I think being raised in Connecticut and in America, yes, I was blessed to have a path that was practically paved if I really wanted it. If I really just stayed going the way everyone else was going and was socially conditioned to go, I probably would have achieved what a lot of us call the American dream, and I would have gone to college and just found, any old job and manifested, probably a good career, but it really, I don't think, would have been fulfilling me in meaningful ways. So it was definitely the near-death experience and my car accident at the age of 16 that really shifted my consciousness and really allowed me to start questioning everything I had learned and really everything I was seeing in society, because so much of it seemed very fear-based, and I because my consciousness had been shifted, I started to approach life a bit differently. Oh, quite a bit differently. I think that's what the spiritual journey does for all of us. It can be very powerful.
I agree, and so many of us have had tragic experiences in our life, and we have had things, emotional issues and whatnot, for us to come to these learnings. Wouldn't you like to think that there's a way that we could help people not have to have that and yet achieve what we've come to achieve?
Yeah, oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I often ask people, I pose the question like, or I say, don't wait for something bad to happen before you start to learn about this stuff, or you start to tap into the spiritual journey. And your wake-up call does not have to be a traumatic event like I experienced. And I've had other wake-up calls that were just a little blip of a thought or a little epiphany that made all the difference in the world. So I think people are starting to figure that out, that it doesn't need to be something deeply traumatic or painful. It really, we all have so many choices that we make on any given day. And I think people are starting to approach just like even simple choices in a different way, and they're getting this in a different way than say a traumatic event. So I think people are definitely getting it just on daily occurrences that can happen in our lives. So,
Jason, I'm having the experience of as a life coach as well, and as the host of this show and the live events. We meet so many people, and I feel like saying to them, you can get this now. Please don't wait for something tragic to happen, because something will happen, because this is the time to get it. There's something happening where there's a quickening. We call it the shift, or the end of ages, or whatever you want to call it, apocalypse, right, and all of that. There's something happening. So if you get it now with my words or your words or some way, or a light experience, an epiphany, you don't have to have a tragic moment like you're saying.
Right. No, exactly. And I think, so many people are, and there's great books out right now about the power of now, and there's a lot of discussion going on right now about the present moment and present moment awareness, and because really all we have is this day, and bring it down even further, all we really have is this now moment, this eternal now moment, and I think people are starting to realize that, and they're starting to tap into something different to make better use of the present moment, because I'm a big fan of asking questions, and I'll ask people, what is the best day of your life? And so many more people today are answering the question, today is the best day of my life, as opposed to, I think a lot of people still will jump to the past or even go to the future to a day that hasn't even happened yet. And I think more and more people are starting to realize that, really all the power that we have, the true power that we have, is right now. And people, I think more and more people are really starting to live for the day. And I see it more and more in the world. But I happen to see a a spiritual revolution going on in the world, and I really feel like that's the only thing that's really getting our world going in the right direction. You know, I mean, I think the more people that start to tap into this power and this love of self and this spiritual journey, really all it's about loving yourself more and then loving other people and the world that much more. And it has a really profound difference, makes a profound difference in people's lives when they start to think along these lines.
You know, Jason, have you ever heard of a progressive dinner party? Where you start off
dinner party?
Yeah, like a progressive dinner.
No, I don't think I've heard of it in those words, but it sounds fun for sure.
Okay. Well, we'll have to have one. No, what it usually is, it's either at several different restaurants or several different people's homes, and you start off at one place and you have drinks, appetizers, and what have you. Then you all get up and go to a different place, and then that same group then has the first course, and then everybody leaves that place and goes someplace else and has another course. And the reason I bring that up is because I don't, at this point, don't really want to make a judgment. You said about, you know, heading in the right direction. You know, there is a revolution taking place, and maybe it's kind of like this progressive dinner party where we started off at, you know, just not going too far back, but the Industrial Revolution, you know, where everything was revolutionized. I mean, and it was all build, and big buildings and railways and all that, you know. And then we went to the technological revolution, right? And that was the next course in our evolution. And so this is the spiritual revolution is just the next course. It happens to be maybe the dessert.
Right. No, I like the way you put that. I'm always I love when I get like I call that like a little nugget, you know, where it really I start to feel that kind of information in a different way than I haven't heard before with that sort of analogy. So I really like that.
Well, good. I'm glad. And one thing that I really like about you is that you continue to teach tennis, and one of the reasons that you do that is because you feel it's a spiritual sport. So let's talk a little bit about that, because I like that analogy.
Okay, great. Well, because I teach tennis from a holistic perspective, you know, because it's become such a part of me. But I've also realized that tennis is a feel-good sport. You know, so much about tennis is a metaphor for life, and so much about tennis, and when you strike the ball, is about the present moment. And in that present moment, no matter how much you're physically moving around the court or how hard you're swinging and all this, you need to be very smooth, balanced, and graceful, and you need to be very calm about it. And I feel the same way about life, that life is a feel-good sport. And really, since we were just talking about the present moment, right within the present moment, we are meant to be calm. We are meant to move through life in a very smooth, balanced, and graceful way. I mean, I don't believe we're meant to live in fear or worry. You know, I believe we are meant to take love-based action, and that's one of the things that I love about tennis. It really is such a spiritual sport, and you know, I can even tie that back to my near-death experience. I mean, it was such a tragic physical event where, you know, my best friend was killed as well, and then I got really hurt and was paralyzed and in a coma. But the actual event, for me, what I experienced, my near-death experience, and just the whole experience, the only remembrance I have is the most peaceful, calm, beautiful, light-filled, loving experience of my life. And it taught me that life is naturally meant to be that way. So I, not only with my near-death experience, with being a tennis player and someone that teaches tennis, and then how I try to incorporate it all into my life, you know, it all just makes perfect sense to me. And that's why I love tennis so much. So partly because of the spiritual component that I try to impart on other people as well.
Well, you know, Jason, I've often wondered why at the beginning of the game the score is love in tennis.
Yeah.
And
There's definitely a lot of love. Yeah.
At least
Right.
it starts with love, right?
Right, yeah, it'll start and ends with love. And I believe life start and ends with love for sure. And I could say more about that, but I do believe life start and ends with love.
Well, so just keeping with the tennis analogy for a moment here, I played very little tennis and very badly at that in high school, but I do remember this aspect of not being tense. So, because if you're tense, then what happens? The ball doesn't. I mean, describe that to me.
Well, you need to just be very fluid when you're swinging, and if you tense up or put on the brakes and your muscles lock up, that just creates tension, and that's not how you strike the tennis ball effectively. You need to have a full, smooth tennis stroke, and so if you're tense, it's just, the ball goes where you tell it to go. And if you're tense, chances are your contact point is going to be off or something's going to be off. And maybe you'll end up making a good shot there, but because you're tense, you won't get to say your next shot very well. Not only are you, and then you'll also be risking injury, which maybe that's a metaphor for life too, by being tense. Obviously, when we're stressful in life, I mean, that can manifest itself as disease, or it can manifest itself in so many different ways. And so, I mean, it's just not a tense, anything like that, any resistance doesn't work in tennis.
Mm-hmm.
So.
It's a great analogy.
Yeah, no, and great tennis, great tennis comes from the inside out, and I believe, a good, meaningful life comes from the inside out. And obviously, we see so much of the life going on around us, this external life, and so many things, the media, pharmaceutical companies, and on and on and on, want us to go from the outside in. Like obviously a lot of people go for career and money first and then try to find this internal component. And I believe we're meant to search out spiritually this internal component, and then the other things fall into place in a much more graceful, harmonious way.
Jason, that's great, and this is what comes out of your painful experience of losing your friend, being in the car accident, and then ending up in the hospital in a coma for 2 weeks. You were headed to a life of living from the outside in. You had all the trappings of what the outside world can offer and a future of that, but you were living from the outside in. So you came to this this epiphany within this experience that we need to be living from the inside out. And
right.
What exactly does that mean to you?
Well, I remember after my car accident, because I had to start to figure some things out, and I had to start to make some changes. So for me, living from the inside out, I mean, in a nutshell, is really about listening to your heart and letting your heart guide you through life, and not letting your ego guide you. So that's one of the things that it means to me. But it's a constant thing. I don't think we can ever get to the point of like, you know what? I think I've had enough of this spiritual stuff. I think it's just a constant thing. Every single day, we remind ourselves what we're grateful for, and we constantly strive to live this life from the inside out. And I've had many friends, and over the course of my life, I'm sure you have too, that have kind of fallen off this spiritual bandwagon and stopped living from the inside out, or just succumbed to the pressure, because there is a lot of pressure in this world to live from the outside going in. I mean, even money is such a powerful thing, but I've really just found that focusing on the internal things, they've made me such a happier person and a more fulfilled person. I really believe that, that we can fulfill our dreams, that the dreams that we have in our heart are there for a reason. That's what we're actually meant to fulfill in this life. And I firmly believe we're all born with gifts inside of us that we're meant to share. And, I don't think we're meant to withhold those gifts. And I think one of the ways that we share those gifts is by living a life from the inside out. I mean, what would we do if all the music and beautiful artwork and so many other things? What happens if those people withheld those gifts from us? I mean, they would just disappear. So I really believe for us to share that unique gift that only we can share in this life, we need to live from the inside out. And that's some of what it means to me. And it's really, a heart-based consciousness versus a ego-based one or a fear-based one. And because I believe the heart will, following our heart, it'll always lead us home, which is, home being, the place that feels good, the place where our head and our heart rest the easiest, and like you said about being tense playing tennis, it's that place. Home is that place where we're not tense and we're not stressed out, and we feel good and we feel love, and we're able to extend love to other people, and that's some of what it means to me.
That's interesting. Well, first of all, you're saying so much in regard to the friends who may have dropped out of the quote unquote spiritual life. I wish there were another word for what you're trying to say and what I'm trying to say. Spiritual. There are so many people that are confusing what spirituality is or isn't. And I don't know that I even live within certain people's definition, or that I want to. But I would tend to believe that the people that have quote unquote dropped out never got to that place, that they were still in their fear base and they were just pretending or trying, but they never got to that place that we're talking about. So because I don't believe there's a way back from this place.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I mean, just to clarify a little bit too, I believe everyone is equally as spiritual. I don't think anybody is more spiritual than anybody else. What I'm kind of referring to is about kind of conscious awareness. And so I think we all have the exact same stuff on the inside of us. Nobody is any better than anybody else. We all have an equal opportunity to tap into this internal stuff that we're talking about. And, it just kind of becomes, really about conscious awareness, about being conscious of your choices. And I think people sometimes don't necessarily think about their choices. They're kind of just going through the motions of life because, that's all they know. So that's kind of what I'm referring to. It's just about conscious awareness. It's about just knowing why you're making certain choices, making choices that consciously make you feel good, and not just doing it out of, like you said, out of fear. And so, that's what I was referring to.
Jason, it's interesting. As I'm listening to our conversation and experiencing this moment, I'm overjoyed, because when we set out to put this show together, Life Changes, from the onset, what we wanted was a conversation between real people, people who have had experiences that have changed their lives, people who are helping other people change their lives, or people that are helping change the world. And in this conversation, here we are, two people that fit in all those three categories. And there are many more people out there like us, and I can't wait to get more of them on the show and start showing people, because I have to say, and part of the concept of the show is there's nothing wrong with woo-woo, and there's nothing wrong with dressing a certain way and listening to Indian music or yoga, which I know you were headed to tonight. I love yoga myself. There's nothing wrong with any of that, but certain people look at that and say, oh, that's what I have to do to be spiritual, or that's the way I need to dress to be spiritual, or I need to meditate while listening to this music. And unfortunately, so many people do not feel that they are on path because they feel separate from that experience. Ironically, a lot of the people that are doing some of those things are also separate from this experience of true spirituality because they feel that they have to do something like that.
Right.
And what we're talking about here is, hey, we're regular people. We look regular. We look great, actually, if I might say so for ourselves. And we are considering ourselves spiritual or on path to an enlightened journey.
Well, I would like to think so, and I want to help other people do it. But when you were just talking about all that stuff, there's nothing wrong with having lots of money or having lots of nice things or dressing a certain way. I think it's about what you're consciously identifying with. So if you're consciously identifying with your heart, and you know that, but yet you still like to dress a certain way, I mean, that to each his own, and if other people
Absolutely.
are judging, if other people are judging you because of driving a certain car or dressing a certain way, that's unfortunately going to be their loss. They're going to have to learn to become more non-judgmental, and they'll get it. They'll get it eventually. Everyone's going to get it. What I don't want, Filippo, is people to wait for their deathbed to kind of start to figure some of this out. And sadly, I think a lot of people do wait until the end of their lives and to start to figure this out. And because I believe obviously some very spiritual things happen before you're going to pass on from this life. And that's kind of how I say it to people. Like, don't wait for something bad to happen, and definitely don't wait for your deathbed until to wake up and start thinking about this stuff. So I just think it's about what you identify with. And when you identify with your heart, you're going to be okay, because that stuff, if the other people are judging you, it's not going to mean anything anyway, because you know where you're coming from. And I think that's what matters, is just what you're identifying with. If you're overly identifying with a job title or a style of dress or a certain brand or how much money you have in the bank, then you're going to learn the hard way, or you're going to figure it out that that's not the most important thing anyway.
Right. And your book, your first book, One Man's Love Story, a Near-Death Experience, I like the use of one man's love story, and especially the way you explained it. So please share with us why the title.
Well, first and foremost, it was, the day of my near-death experience. I now had this new force of love living through me. And again, it doesn't matter what word you use, but I had this new force of love living through me. And even when I was paralyzed and in a coma, I knew I would get better. And that's all I knew. And so when you feel that way and you start to think that way, of course you're going to get better. It's the only thing that can happen. I chose the title, because I do believe life is an unfolding love story for all of us. It's an unfolding journey, but I think guiding it all is a very loving force. And again, call that loving force whatever you wish. I personally also chose the title because I'm a man, obviously, and maybe in our society at one point or another, maybe it was taboo for a man to use the word love so much. And I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I partly chose it for that because, I'm obviously a man, and I want part of my work, I want to be with men, to help men get more in touch with themselves, whether it's a stereotype or not, that men aren't in touch with themselves. I don't know, but I like to help men or women or children, anyone really, get in touch with this meaningful stuff. So it's part of the reason why I chose the titles, because after a near-death experience, I started to realize that my life has now become an unfolding love story. And I started to comment on it before. Like, I believe that we come into this world only knowing love, and we're only going to return to love. And so that's what the spiritual journey for me is also about, learning as much about love and living as much love as I possibly can before I leave this world. And obviously I want to contribute as much love as I possibly can while I'm here. So that's kind of why I chose the title. So I appreciate you asking about it.
Well, I'm feeling the love, and you're talking, of course, also about self-love. And it's interesting because in conversation earlier, you and I battle with the same word that unfortunately doesn't express well what we're trying to say, and that word is selfishness. Right?
Okay.
You said there's good selfish and there's bad selfish, and I think there's selfish and selflessness. But I know what you're saying. Go ahead and share with the audience, if you will, what you were getting at.
Well, the way I understand it is, the good selfish and the bad selfish. The good selfish, let's say, is about spiritual growth, taking the time, finding the time within a given day to, to meditate or take some self-love time, to exercise or to eat well, and because it's really all about loving yourself and then loving other people that much more. That's the good selfish. And the bad selfish is obviously, say, like we talked about before, withholding your gift or obviously not giving of yourself to other people. Like I walk the world with a very open heart, and I like to think really any person, any stranger, anybody could come up to me and, you have yourself an open heart and a shoulder to lean on if need be. So I think, that negative selfish is where you withhold your gifts and kind of keep to yourself and everything. I mean, there's other things involved in that, but, and the selflessness is obviously, as I understand it, is just, you give of yourself freely, because obviously when you give, you're going to end up getting so much more in return, and I think sometimes people think, if I give something, I have to get something back. It's not about keeping track. It's just about knowing that if you give forth energy, whether that energy is money or compassion or love, you're gonna get it back tenfold. So that's how I understand, the good selfish versus the bad selfish. And obviously in our society, if someone says the word selfish, it depends on what context they use it in, but for me, it's I focus on the good selfish because I know it's revolved around making myself a better person, and which allows me to be a better person to other people too. So,
Jason,
that's how I understand it.
One of the ways that I've put it in the past is that if our selfishness comes from our higher self, then it is an act that will serve not only ourselves but all humanity. But if our selfishness comes from our ego, then it will only serve us, and even at that, seemingly so, because in the end it will hurt us. So I appreciate the fact that you we're having the same issues with those words, because so few people understand that concept. So I'm glad it came out in the show.
I appreciate the way you put it, and that's just I love that when someone else can articulate it better than I can, and it definitely feeds me, because I love any kind of spiritual food. So I love when someone else can put it a better way.
Well, that's food for thought for you, food for thought for me from some of what you've shared with us, and I know food for thought for some, or food for our spiritual souls, for our audience, that I'm sure has enjoyed and gotten a lot out of this interview. And so for those who want to learn more about you or want to read your book, they can go to oneman'slovestory.net. And the book, again, is One Man's Love Story, A Near-Death Experience. And Jason Hughes, it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you so much. I will just add that obviously you could also go to Amazon.com. That might even be a better place if people really, it's probably the easiest way to get a copy of this book.
Okay.
But well, I really love being here, Filippo, and I love talking about this stuff, and so it just felt like another conversation to me. So thank you.
And a good conversation at that. Thank you right back to you. We've been talking to Jason Hughes, tennis pro, trainer, writer, author, and life coach, author of One Man's Love Story, A Near-Death Experience. So with that, I look forward to more conversations like that. We look forward to our guests next week. But in the meantime, we've got our State of the Universe address with Dorothy Lee.
Hi. Have you ever heard the phrase, what other people think of you is none of your business? This is very good advice, and I ask each of our listeners to never stop believing in you and in the truth of who you are. As the divine children of God that we all are, we are powerful beyond imagination. There are so many changes happening in our lives these days, and one of the reasons we do this show each week is to help you remember that you are the power in your world. World history is full of wonderful stories of men and women who never gave up. They believed in themselves in spite of many other people's ideas and opinions about their ability to succeed, and in spite of major obstacles to their successes. For example, did you know that Albert Einstein couldn't speak until he was 4 years old and didn't read until he was 7? His parents and teachers worried about his mental ability. Beethoven's music teacher said about him, as a composer, he is hopeless. What if the young man had believed that? When Thomas Edison was a young boy, his teacher said he was so stupid he could never learn anything. He once said, I remember I used to never be able to get along at school. I was always at the foot of my class, and my father thought I was stupid, and I almost decided that I was a dunce. What if young Thomas had believed what they said about him? When the sculptor Rodin was young, he had difficulty learning to read and write. Today, we might diagnose him as having a learning disability. But his father said of him, I have an idiot for a son. His uncle agreed. Walt Disney was once fired by a newspaper editor because he was thought to have no good ideas. Caruso was told by one music teacher, you can't sing. You have no voice at all. An editor told Louisa May Alcott that she was incapable of writing anything that would have popular appeal. And we all know the story of Colonel Sanders, who started his very successful KFC restaurants only after he turned 65, and the building of an interstate freeway had put him out of his previous business. There are so many great people from all walks of life who never gave up and then became world famous. One of the greatest men this world has ever known could have decided he was a victim and a loser, but fortunately he did not, even though his challenges were many. He had to go to work to support his family at the age of 7 because his family was forced out of their home. His mother died when he was only 9, and his beloved sister died when he was only 10. At the young age of 25, his first business failed. He ran for office as a state legislator when he was 26 and lost. He also lost his job and wanted to go to law school, but he was refused admittance. When he was 27, he borrowed some money from a friend to begin a business, and by the end of the first year, he was bankrupt. He spent the next 17 years of his life paying off his debt. He ran for the state legislature again at the age of 28, and this time he won. He was engaged to be married, and his sweetheart died, and his heart was broken, which led to a complete nervous breakdown, and he ended up in bed for 6 months. A year and a half later, he ran for Speaker of the state legislature, and he was defeated. He ran for elector 2 years later and was defeated again. 3 years after, he ran for Congress, and he lost. He waited another 3 years and ran again. This time he won and went to Washington. 2 years later, he ran for re-election to Congress, and he lost. He returned to his home state a year later, seeking the job of land officer, and was turned down. 5 years later, he ran for state senator, and he lost. 2 years later, he sought the vice presidential nomination at his party's national convention, and he only got 100 votes. 2 years later, he ran for U.S. Senate again, and lost once more. And finally, he ran for President of the United States, and he won. This man was Abraham Lincoln. So what if Lincoln and all the others I have mentioned had listened to their critics and had become discouraged? Where would our world be without the leadership of Lincoln, the music of Beethoven, the art of Rodin, or the ideas of Albert Einstein, Louisa May Alcott, Walt Disney, and Thomas Edison? As Henry Ford said so long ago, whether you think you can or you think you cannot, you are right. Each one of you listening tonight have great potential, unlimited potential. When you believe in all you can be rather than all you cannot become, you will find your passion and the joy, bliss, and happiness we all strive for will be yours. Until next week, please choose to love yourself enough to make very conscious and elegant choices. And please know that you are loved, you are lovable, and you are loved.
Thank you, Dorothy, with that State of the Universe address. And boy, some of that hit home with me as I was reflecting back on our week last week, and for that matter, our several months leading up to all that we have been doing, from just the idea of putting on such a show to then not only having the radio show, but having the live events. And we just came off of a week where we had our fourth and our very successful live event at the huge Universal City Hilton here in Los Angeles, California, with Dr. Eric Pearl, who speaks all over the world and who has spoken for the United Nations and who has spoken to a sold-out audience at the Madison Square Garden in New York. And he was our guest interviewee for this show, and we were quite proud of that, and that we are able to, from such humble beginnings and not too long ago, be attracting these kinds of guests to our shows. And one of the beautiful things is, after the show, he came back and said, I liked that very much, and I'll be back in 2 months if you'd like to do that again. And it was difficult to get him at first, but afterwards, what a beautiful thing to have somebody say that. And so many people are saying that. So many people are coming out of the woodwork to help out. And it's interesting because we have had so many experiences at our live events where people are having such transformations. And I had a friend, without going into the story, say that I can't come to this particular one because of such and such and such. And I shared to her, well, how do you know that such and such isn't perfect? And she said, well, because it was supposed to be this way and supposed to be that way. And I said, how do you know you're not right about how it's supposed to be, and maybe it's supposed to be exactly like this? Well, I just received a call from her today saying that, of course, she came and how perfect it was. And maybe someday I'll share the story. The reason I bring this up right now is because in talking to somebody who I did not know today, who wants to offer help on our next live show in this way and that way. And I thought, well, I think it's supposed to be this way, and we're supposed to be able to afford to able to have somebody do this and do that. And as I was saying this, I was recalling my words, and that maybe it's supposed to be exactly as it is. So people are coming out of the woodwork to help, and we're getting some very interesting requests from people wanting us to do the show in other locations. So we might be in a town near you sooner than we think, and nothing would make us happier. And so we're grateful to Mark Lejeune, who brought us today's guest, Jason Hughes. We're also grateful to him for bringing us Dr. Eric Pearl at our live event. And so much that goes into this. I'm grateful for Dorothy Lee and all that she does, and the producing that goes on behind the scenes that she does. And, of course, Mark Skelton, who is a producer for our live events and who normally gets the guests for our show. There's just so much beauty here, and it's part of my awakening. And before the show used to be called Life Changes with Filippo, and I started saying soon after the show started, it probably could be appropriately called life is changing for Filippo. And so now it's life changes, and probably could be life changes for all. But in the meantime, it is what it is. And we're so happy to be here together, presenting this information, presenting our changes, looking at them positively, and moving forward, upward, and onward. So it has been my pleasure serving as host of Life Changes today, and invite you to learn more about Jason by going to our website at lifechanges.ws. You'll learn about our guests, you'll learn about our past guests, you'll be able to hear all of our shows there. And you will also learn about our next guest, who is John Beal, who, together with his daughter, actress and social entrepreneur Jessica Beal, and also co-founder Kent McBride, founded MTDN, Make the Difference Network. And it's a company for not-profit organizations, helping not-profit organizations raise more money, raise awareness, and he has some very clever ways of doing it. And so it is our pleasure at Life Changes to present that information to you all. It's something that you all will want to be involved in. That is our show for today. Remember, you can keep the conversation going during the week by visiting us and writing us on our website. We do our best to respond to everybody that writes in, at the moment at least. It's getting quite exciting. And it's lifechanges.ws. You can connect with us also on Facebook and our fan page as well on Facebook, which you'll find at Life Changes or Life Changes Live or Life Changes with Filippo. Today's show has been made possible in part by our sponsors, Ion Ways Water Systems. Change your water, change your life, and Love and Miracles. To learn more about them, visit our sponsor page on our website and click on their links. I am Filippo Voltaggio, and it has been my pleasure being of service by hosting Life Changes today. Again, with our producers Dorothy Lee and Mark Skelton and Mark Lejeune, and our engineer Seth, we thank you for joining us and being part of this show and being part of the change we all wish to see in the world. Ciao, everyone.
You have been listening to Life Changes. Join us here every Monday night at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And visit us on the web at lifechangeswithfilippo.com. That's Filippo, Filippo. And follow our community on Facebook at Life Changes with Filippo. Join us here next week as we consciously embrace and explore the only constant, life changes.